Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The Mexico Grand Prix weekend is well underway and Mercedes are feeling more and more confident in the state of their car. Hamilton saying he's had one of the best practice sessions that he really remembers this season and really believes they're moving in a good direction with the car. Will it be quick enough in a straight line though to compete here around Mexico? That is a big question that remains to be answered. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Before we discuss practice, wanted to mention this quickly from Ferrari. Concerns about Carlos Sainz's engine. They do need to take a new engine there. They apparently have some sort of issue with it that they solved with the engine that Charles Leclerc took back in Austin, and they want to put a new one in for Carlos Sainz here. But of course, he DNF'd in Suzuka. He DNF'd last week, which wasn't his fault back in Austin. And now, look, is he going to take another PU penalty? That'd be pretty tough. He doesn't want to do it, right? He wants to start where he qualifies, but they might be forced to, is the situation coming out of Ferrari as it stands. He actually topped FP1 yesterday, a really entertaining session because look at these times. Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz 1-2 for Ferrari, then 3-4 for Red Bull, exactly the same time between Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen, and the entire top 7 or top 6 certainly was separated by 0.2 of a second. That's really exciting stuff. Alonso, Hamilton was up here as well, looking pretty good in the Mercedes, and yeah, Alonso in the Alpine, Alfa Romeo of Bottas, McLaren of Norris, like Gasly was up there. It definitely set an exciting prospect for the weekends. Now, some drivers having issues. Verstappen had a couple of spins. The Red Bull did look like a bit of a handful, to be fair. These, I believe, were, though, the prototype tyres. This was for the second session where there was, prototype tyre testing. So a 90-minute session for next year's tyres. And this was the quite remarkable situation where Russell topped free practice 2, then Yuki Tsunoda, then Esteban Ocon in third. I believe the only 3 drivers that really did any proper laps on the kind of the actual compound that is going to be used in the race, and of course in qualifying rather than next year's compound. The fastest lap, I believe, on the kind of future compound is Hamilton's 1:21.5. It was Perez, Verstappen, Leclerc all around a similar kind of ballpark on next year's tyres, and we'll see Hamilton has some thoughts on them in a second, because they're not going to push them too hard and all this type of stuff. They don't really know how the tyres behave, just want to get an understanding. But, you know, Russell, Tsunoda, Ocon did some decent laps themselves on the other tyres, but obviously not a particularly representative session when Yuki Tsunoda is sitting here in P2. Now, these are the numbers coming out of practice in terms of qualifying and race pace simulation. Red Bull and Ferrari, again, look pretty much neck and neck in terms of quali sim. Mercedes about 0.3 behind. Not bad for Mercedes, in fairness. Alpine, McLaren, etc., further down. Williams around any sort of corners. It's not looking good. Now, this is race simulation pace. So, when they were doing their longer runs, Mercedes, again, a little bit further off. Ferrari, Red Bull. But, of course, this doesn't really take into account that much the tyre deg, which has generally been a bit of an issue for Ferrari so far this year. So this is race simulation stuff. Obviously, who knows what it means for qualifying and the race itself, but interesting to look at regardless, because Mercedes are probably closer now than they have been at any part of this season, to be honest. And it makes a fair bit of sense. Hamilton was saying that he had a really good session. He seemed really optimistic about the car, the way it was handling in Friday practice. Now, he also went on to say, though, he doesn't know how the car might respond. It's obviously a bit of a tricky beast. The W13 doesn't always do what the drivers want it to do. One day it might turn up and look good. Some other days might not look so good. But we've generally seen so far this season, whenever Mercedes have a good idea what's going on Friday, they can piece it together. We saw even back in Hungary where they had a great race. Friday was a disaster for them. They figured something out on Saturday and then it went well for the rest of the weekends. But it seems difficult for them to get a handle on it, but they do seem to understand a little bit more now about how to get the best out of the car. There also was some cooling issues, which probably will continue as well for other teams. Let's not rule this out at all this weekend, because with the lower air density and the high altitudes of Mexico City Grand Prix, there is less air to cool the engine. So you've got to make a compromise between cooling and a downforce and this type of stuff. And engine cooling, we would imagine going into the season, was going to be a key issue for Mercedes because of their narrow side pods. They seem to have found a way to make it work. They have had a couple of cooling issues this season. Back in Australia was one, and of course even it was Spain the other one, right, where Hamilton towards the end got Sainz and then had to back off and let Sainz come through because the engine was going to explode. So it is a concern for pretty much the entire grid this weekend in terms of engine cooling. They reckon it's now been solved, but this might mean they have to sacrifice performance elsewhere to ensure the engine doesn't blow up. But of course, retirements could well come into play this weekend. So Hamilton gives some thoughts on this. I'll just share his perspective for you guys. Basically, really optimistic about the car, the way it was feeling, enjoyed driving it around the track. The car's feeling better and better. So only 3 more races to try and get a victory, but Hamilton reckons there could be a chance.
No, I feel really, really good. Generally had a really good session today. So I really enjoyed driving around the track today. The car is feeling better and better as we work more through it and we understand it more. And whilst we had the tyre test at the end, it was just reconnaissance laps, just like practice. But yeah, I don't know really where we stand compared to others because everyone's on different programs. Obviously, George was on a different program because he missed P1, but I just focused on mine.
And you feel it can get better throughout the weekend as well, do you?
Oh, well, I have no idea. You never know with this car. Tomorrow morning it could slap me in the face and not be happy, but I hope that's not the case. And I hope, of course, we'll do plenty of work tonight to see if we can etch ourselves a little bit further forwards.
And when it comes to the 2023 tyres, if you were racing on them this weekend, would you have an even better chance of being further up the field?
With this car, no. It's the same car, so I don't think it would change the order, the tyres. They seem very, very much the same. Maybe a little bit more consistent, maybe on the long run, potentially. Not overheating as much, potentially, but in general, it's not a lot different.
The other thing to note around Mexico is that starting P1 is usually a massive curse. You don't want to qualify on pole around Mexico. Certainly that is the evidence over the last few years. There's a bit of a curse there, and it makes sense because going into turn 1, it's usually a mess. There's an 800 odd meter run down into turn 1. So if you start on pole or even on second on the grid, you're going to be vulnerable to the guys behind you, third and fourth, because they've got the slipstream, and there's a long time for that slipstream to come into effect. So that's why we saw last year and previous years Verstappen from P3 getting the job done into turn 1, and pretty much third is where you want to start on the grid. And if there is a grid penalty for Carlos Sainz, if there is any issues for Perez, Leclerc or Verstappen, there's a good chance there's a Mercedes in third on the grid, which could give them a good chance into turn 1. And if they can lead into turn 1, who knows what's going to happen. We of course saw around Austin that once the Red Bull gets within a second, it's GG down the long straight, and you'd expect that to be the same around here. But straight line speed will be important. And we saw in the first practice session that Verstappen was, again, another 10 kph up on Hamilton, and the Mercedes is pretty much the slowest car in a straight line, but it is the fastest by a margin in the slower corners. So the slower corners of Sector 2, the Mercedes is rapid. In the faster corners, it's pretty much equal, and then in a straight line, that's where they lose out. So it's a difficult one. Of course, you'd prefer to be faster in a straight line, which is where Red Bull have had all their success generally this season. However, Mercedes were running some alternate rear wing strategies. They had Russell using a slightly different approach to Hamilton with a little bit less downforce. So he was actually clocking about 3.45, which is similar to Verstappen. So maybe maybe they turned the engine up for one lap. I don't know. Obviously difficult to say, but clearly Russell was trying something which enabled them to generate a bit less downforce, but also have a better time in the straight line. So I guess their decision is to be made about whether it's better off doing that or whether it's better off being rapid in the slower corners, but then vulnerable on the DRS straight. So that's the discussion they'll have to make. But of course, Mercedes ran both options in FP2 to see what was better off for them. And they might go with Russell's approach if it gives them a better chance of actually getting a result. And Hamilton kind of is targeting a good weekend. Russell also said that he reckons at least a podium is on the card. So they're feeling confident in the state of the car. Of course, qualifying can change everything. But qualifying, as I say, doesn't mean everything around here, not just for the race, but also into turn 1, as we have seen historically. And I'll share a little bit more on that in a second. Just wanted to mention quickly on the Sainz-Russell thing back in Austin, because Carlos Sainz has pretty much said to the FIA he wishes they were less soft on him. He reckons they should have been harsher. The 5-second penalty wasn't enough in his opinion. And what do you guys think about this statement here from George Russell? In the car, you try and defend yourself in every way. I knew I was at fault in the incident with Carlos, but I never would have admitted it before the FIA made their decision. This is the mentality of F1 drivers. Once they gave me the penalty, I apologize. So saying outright that because of course he said at the time he turned into me or whatever, right? And he reckons he knew at the time he was in the wrong, but he didn't want to say it until they gave him a penalty, because he's not going to say to the FIA, I was wrong, please give me a penalty, which I kind of respect it in a way, right? It's kind of an out there thing to say, but it's kind of understandable. And you can imagine F1 drivers do think this way, that I'm not going to tell the FIA did something wrong until they decide it for themselves, which I understand. And he did apologize after, but he's pretty much saying outright that F1 drivers, especially George Russell, don't take take the blame at the time, at least, if they can possibly avoid it. But yes, this is the pole sitter's curse at Mexico since 2017. Every pole sitter in the last 4 times we have raced here has not won and has not even finished on the podium. Bottas last year, Leclerc, Riccardo, Vettel since 2017. So if you're on pole, you're probably not leading into turn 1, and even if you are, things can go badly wrong. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.